You're listening to Buena Vibra with Dr. Ortiz. The content in this podcast is strictly informational and does not substitute psychotherapy treatment or replace the process for clinical diagnosis or psychological prognosis. Hola, Buena Vibra. I'm Doctora Ortiz, and thank you again for joining me for another episode of Buena Vibra with Doctora Ortiz. Today, I have the pleasure of having two guests on this episode. Our first guest is Janisha Mickens-Ingram, also known as Your Happy Therapist, is a licensed marriage and family therapist based in California. She is founder and CEO of a group private practice, The Happy Therapist, and also facilitates a study program called StudyRite, assisting new clinicians in studying towards earning their licensure. Furthermore, she works with clients on issues of low self-esteem, attachment issues, and setting healthy boundaries. Our second guest is Shawnnell Pugh, is a licensed clinical social worker, also based in California. She is a USC alumni and a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She is founder and CEO of Energy Wellness Incorporated and is a boundary-centered practitioner who works with high-achieving women of color towards eliminating people-pleasing and codependent behaviors. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Yay, we made it.
We made it. Right. Finally.
Yes. It's
For having
been
us.
Yes, thank you.
thank you so much for making the time out of your busy schedules to be here and do this recording. We've been talking about it now since February when we met in person because we're all part of a mentorship program with Dr. TK. And we finally did it, right? We're here.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
So I want to, whoever wants to jump in, telling our listeners, our viewers, because this is also, in video format, a little bit about yourselves, how you came into the field. Whoever wants to start.
Janisha, you want to go first?
Oh, just put it on a new booty. Okay, I am Janisha Mickens-Ingram, better known as Your Happy Therapist. This story never gets old for me. The way that I actually got into being a mental health therapist is one of my good friends from Dominguez Hills called me one day after we graduated, like years later, and was like, let's go get our master's degree. And I'm like, yo, you barely wanted to go to school and finish your BA. Like, what are we doing here? And so I was like, what are we going to go for? So at this time, I'm just like in life, just complacent, and just selling. And I feel like I was thriving at that moment. But then I was like, why not? What is it going to hurt? So we made the appointments for University of Phoenix. I showed up. She never showed up. And to this day, I'm like, I'm still waiting for you to show up to our appointment. And here I am, a mental health therapist. I've always been a helper. I had poor boundaries, which was, found out as I went through school and going through my own therapy that I didn't have boundaries as you see. I went to school because somebody else said, let's go. And I'm like, cool, let's go get our degree. But it ended up working out for the good. So that's how I started my journey of mental health.
Wow.
Uh-huh. And what about you, Shawn?
I've always been just active, like growing up in church, and I was always taught to serve others in my church, in my community, probably a little bit more than I should have. You can still serve others with some boundaries. So I had a lot of poor boundaries as well growing up, definitely, and saw a lot of interesting dynamics between my parents and so some life experiences pretty much brought me to a place where I felt like people would come to me, and I was always kind of talking to people and counseling them, and so forth. And so as I got older, I remember after I graduated Cal State, San Bernardino, I actually wanted to be a forensic pathologist. I wanted to go into forensics. And so I was working as an educational assistant in the jails. And so, but I would love enjoying seeing the kids and talking with them. They would always come, Miss Shawn, and telling me their life stories, and I would just encourage them. And then I would see these people always like walking with these suits on, like walking in and sitting down and talking. And so one day I was like, I wonder who they are, you know? So I went and I asked one of the probation officers. They were like, oh, they're therapists. You know, they come and they talk to the kids. I'm like, oh, maybe I should go get my master's or something like that. So I ended up doing like an interview with the one of the supervisors. He was like an MFT, and then he just basically told me like what they did and just kind of helped me, you know, to decide, should I get an MSW or MFT? And then I just started researching and looking into programs, and I always wanted to go to USC. And so that was like a dream, and I didn't go undergraduate. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this program. And so that's how I ended up at USC in 2000 and tell everybody it's almost 20 years, like 2000, 2005 to 2000. And yeah, I graduated in 07. So it was a wonderful experience. And then I pretty much hit the ground running after that. And like Janisha was saying, like just my own journey of healing and getting, you know, I'm thankful for programs like that make you as a practitioner want to go into get your own therapy so you can resolve your own trauma. and so a lot of just deep healing and reflection and learning about boundaries and a lot of self-care, because I went into like DCFS. I was like doing child abuse investigations. And so when you're a server and you give, you know, and you've never been taught that you still need to have boundaries within the confines of helping others, I just completely burnt out. And so, through that experience, that's when that was like my journey towards redefining, understanding boundaries and redefining them for myself in my life, not just at work, but also like within my family, just within all of my relationships. That's pretty much where my journey started when I fell out at DCFS. I said, oh no, you know.
Yeah. So, you know, it's interesting. You both are talking about boundaries, your own personal experiences with challenges in setting healthy boundaries for yourself. And it's a very common thing too, right? We grow up in family systems where they're closed. It's hard to let people in. We're taught not to let people in, keep it in, and everybody is in your business, and you know, everybody's in your business, and everybody is on a need to know. You know, it's not a it's not an option of what you're up to next. Decisions typically are made as a whole, or you're considering, or you do what others expect of you or tell you what to do. And it's how can I say this? Refreshing, interesting, you know, to hear that this is you know, that there's a commonality here. Obviously it's it can be very unhealthy when it's not appropriately handled and managed, but refreshing in the sense that it is validating that, you know, sometimes we feel like we're the only ones going through something like that, or there's something wrong with us. Your thoughts on that?
I think a lot of times, now that I'm older, I start recognizing the trauma response when dealing with boundaries. And it never like seems to amaze me. Like sometimes I'd be like, wow, I still kind of struggle with certain things, right? And creating boundaries is a consistent, constant, ongoing thing. It's not something that you know, don't keep up on a regular. And so for me personally, I feel that when I practice strict boundaries, the people around me are able to practice those boundaries, and then accepting and learning to adjust to it. Because I know once I got to a certain point in my life, I know my husband probably was like, whoa, this is all a lot, like at one time. So actually recognizing like how to kind of implement those boundaries so that it's just not a culture shock to like the real close people around you, because as you're growing and changing, your partners or the people around you are growing and changing too. So it's about that communication factor. Like, look, I realize that the reason why I do these things is because of, you know, my childhood trauma. So I'm creating these boundaries because I didn't know what it looked like to just say no. I thought I had to say yes to everything in order to, you know, have this group of people around me. And that's not ultimately true. But communication is, I think, the biggest component when we think about boundaries. Like, I'm giving you a chance to say, this works for me or it doesn't, you know, and then you guys decide together, like, okay, that boundary is not an expectation. This is a make it or break it type of thing. This is something that I'm not going to negotiate with, right? So when we set these boundaries, it's like, I always say in my therapy, I have this worksheet called Build a Nigga, Build a Bitch, or Build a Partner, Build a Self, right? And it's so funny because I randomly just have these Floridian slips, right? And I'm like, oh, that's a good worksheet because I see outcomes from my clients setting these boundaries. So if these expectations is not something that your partners or friendships can really uphold, then guess what? You have to make some decisions. So either they meet 80% of your worksheet, and if they're not meeting 80%, are you willing to work with them for that other 20% or that other 30%? So I think that's where boundaries look like for me.
And being afraid to set boundaries. I think that was definitely my trauma response, people pleasing. I can be a fawner. You know, we got that fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I can be a fawner. I can also be where I'm trying to run around doing everything for everybody. And then I could be a fighter too, you know, just depends on the day. But, and sometimes a flight, you know, I'm like, I'm in my zone, I'm working, I'm, you know, and I'm trying not to deal with whatever's happening. And so there's a lot of fear in setting boundaries, especially with family. Very, very difficult. But, you know, what I've learned is, you know, for me personally, you know, you really have to, it takes time to build up to the point where you don't feel responsible for other people's reaction to whatever boundary it is that you need to set in order to keep yourself mentally well. And that can be very difficult, I find, in minority families, in my opinion, because there's a lot of, I would say, like, I don't know if I can use the word unconscious boundaries or rules within minority families. Like, you know, you don't tell my business, you don't do this, you don't let nothing come out of the house, you know, just a lot of things that I feel like reinforces emotional abuse. But then we can't recognize that. And I've had to recognize things in my own life that really reinforced me not saying or telling or just different things, because I'm trying to protect, you know, because it's about the family, you know, very difficult to that enmeshment in the family and to move in a space and where you are, you know, that individuation, that object relations, you know, we're going back to those theories, right? That you are still a whole and complete person, but it's very difficult, I find, within minority groups for people to move outside of that as an individual. It's a lot of times it's like, no, this is the family. You're not doing this for the family. You know, I have a lot of women that, you know, their parents want them to take care of their siblings, you know, just all kinds of things that's creating stress and anxiety. but it's all about the family, you know.
Right.
So they're allowing themselves to be parentified before they've even had their own kids, or making decisions like not going away to college because they feel responsible emotionally for their parents, or they're becoming
their siblings.
Right. Or they're mediators between their mother and father, or their siblings, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of I always tell people, like, these unconscious boundaries that we reinforce, unfortunately, within our families, that it makes it very, very difficult and emotionally, because then when you say no to the family, that system, you're looked at as the black sheep, or or you're mean, or nobody wants to be mean, or a bad person, or you're not a team player. And then there's the guilt, and then there's the shame that comes with wanting to just be an individual, to wanting to just make decisions for yourself.
I
Yeah.
like what you just said. I was going to ask you, based on that, how often do you have to, like, both of you guys, second guess how you're going to respond to individuals because they know that you're a therapist and always expect you to work in that scope? Like, even as a human, like, as a human, I'm a human first, then I'm a therapist. Like, what's your experience with that?
You know, it's funny that you ask. That's a really great question, because I've had to train myself, you know, because I think in the beginning, you know, you know, la psicóloga del hogar, you know, she's the psychologist, the family psychologist. So, you know, and then having to navigate that, because in school they tell us don't mix the two, right? And so, you know, easier said than done, because I've always, like, my parents have always been involved in everything that I do. I'm a girl. I identify as a woman, you know, but to my parents, I'm still their little girl. So they're going to worry about me. I talk to them, you know, even now, you know, I talk to them on a daily basis, but that's because I also like that. I enjoy that. And I think that's the other piece to also keep in mind. Like, what are the things that you're okay with, and how do you move that forward? But I think, you know, in the beginning, as a, you know, being green in the field, and learning to set those boundaries in the therapeutic setting, because they tell us don't tell too much about yourself, you know, and then, you know, coming home, and it's, how do you fix this? You tell us what to do. Um, or, you know, navigate these situations. It's very uncomfortable. It's very unsettling. There's a lot of pressure with that. And then if you're damned, how does the saying go?
If you damn if you don't.
Right, because
if you don't.
right, because if you thank you, because if you get it wrong, because if you make a choice and they decide to go with that, and it just goes really bad, then you get blamed for it, you know, and you don't have to be a therapist to experience that, you know, be the therapist in the family to experience that. But I think it takes a greater toll, because
The
I'm the expert.
expectations.
Right,
Expectations.
right. Absolutely. I'm the expert. So why, you know, you must not be good. You went to school for all this time, and this is, you know, and that's what happened. So from the, you know, once I started to get little bits of that and experience that, that's where I really began to say, you know what? I don't know. I can't help you with that. You know, I don't, really setting the tone and that limit of what I am, how I am able to show up within the family, with my friends too, and just in any relationship. And and being okay with saying no, which, you know, that was something that I learned as an adult, at least within, you know, actually with all of my relationships, my peers, my romantic relationships, my, and then of course with my family where, I'm the oldest daughter. So I do everything. And in lots of ways I still do, but I do them now with a sense of like love and happiness. I don't feel the same frustrations that come when it's imposed on me, like Janisha, you said, like the expectations. And yeah, so it goes down, as you both were talking, a few words that I wrote down and that I talk about with my clients all the time is what are your absolutes? What are the things you're willing to negotiate and compromise on? And understanding that when you are setting these boundaries, 99.9% of the time, you're going to feel guilt. It just comes with boundary setting and it's okay.
Right.
So yeah, that's my take on it. Shawn.
Yeah. There's like 1,000 incidences that have come up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's very difficult to not be able to just show up as someone's friend. That's it. I don't want to be your therapist. I have had, without saying too much, I have had to redefine the boundaries of several friendships in my life. It was very painful for me because on one hand, there was a friendship. On the other hand, it felt like I was doing therapy, And so I've had to learn not to, I'm a rescuer.
By nature.
By nature. By nature. I'm like,
Yeah.
And so I've had to not only learn, I've had to learn not to do that with my husband. I've had to learn to not do that with my in-laws. I've had to learn to not do that seriously with my own parents, which is that's a whole, they need a whole podcast. I've had to learn how to do that. I've had to learn, I've had to break off. I've had to break off some unhealthy friendships. And then I've been able to also redefine a boundary because the relationship meant a lot to me. And then me and that person was able to communicate, hey, I don't want to know about your there's certain things that I would like to know. So the relationship is not the way that it was, but there's still a relationship, but it's different.
Yeah.
It's different. Yeah. And so there was a grief. There's a lot of grief.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of grief and loss that comes with setting boundaries.
Yes.
That we don't talk about. The person doesn't have to be deceased for you to actually grieve the loss of that relationship. And so I'm grieving right now, over a situation that I had to set a huge boundary recently with my parents. And so, it's not, setting a boundary is not without all of the emotions.
It's not easy at all.
It's not easy at all. Not at all. And so I think people look at another person that's able to set boundaries and they think that, oh, well, it's easier for you. Absolutely not. I've just learned to manage it in different ways so that I am mentally well for myself and even to do this work.
Absolutely.
Or even with my patients. I think a few weeks ago we were all doing I think I got a lot of help from you both with I redid my policies and practices, and I resent it out to all my patients, and I set boundaries about when I'm gonna when I can respond to you. If you see me on social media, don't DM me. I'm not gonna respond. I have had to set a lot of professional boundaries in order to stay to one, model healthy boundaries with my patients,
Absolutely.
and two, so that there's no blurring of the relationship, that I can be non-judgmental and reflective and helpful for you if it's not where it feels like a friendship. You know what I'm saying? So I've had to do that. It was very hard. And people don't realize there's all kinds of boundaries. There's financial boundaries.
Right.
There's time boundaries. Showing up on time and leaving and things like that people, there's, of course, we know sexual boundaries. There's physical boundaries. There's emotional boundaries,
Absolutely.
So there's internal boundaries that people don't see. And then there's external boundaries that are just like, the list of what I said, like where you can actually see them, So it's very difficult. It's not easy to negotiate or to set boundaries at all.
Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to what Janisha was saying too, right? That setting boundaries and applying them, it's a lifelong process, because even as we're growing and we're evolving, our boundaries are going to shift. So communication is so important. I think both of you have said it, it's how we are communicating our expectations, our wants, our desires, our needs, and being able to communicate it. How we're communicating these boundaries is also important, because we can do this in a very passive way, in a very aggressive way, and we can do this in a very appropriate, using effective communication. And so I want to dive a little bit into the work that you do with your clients. What are some of the themes that come up for them, in working and towards setting healthy boundaries? What are some things that come up for them when you're talking about boundaries, limit setting, so forth?
I think first thing is a culture shock. Like, what is a boundary? Also adjustment, which causes anxiety, which may trigger some other things like, okay, now I'm so anxious, now I'm depressed and I can't engage. So we have to go through this funnel of where are we at when we talk about boundaries. A lot of times what I do with my clients, I have a journal that I make called Their Fire Ain't Your Fire. And what that simply means is that someone can be in crisis for themselves. And a lot of time us as therapists see it a lot more often, like, okay, it's a crisis for you, but not for your family members. And that's when that triangulation comes in, because I need to get this off of my chest, because I'm so afraid to tell this person communicatively, like what I feel or what I need from them. So I'm gonna go to somebody else, right? To try to get that anxiety off before I address the issue. But now you're passing off that anxiety on to other people, and you're not really fixing the dynamics of what needs to be addressed. So I think the triangulation is one of the biggest components that comes into therapy. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be a person. It can be a substance. It can be overeating. It can be, avoidance. So that triangulation looks a lot different for each one of my clients. So you have to identify what is that triangulation for that client, and say, what do you get out of going to this person instead of directly? So for context, for our listeners, a triangulation is, if I'm having issues with my husband, my partner, but I go to Shawn and say, Shawn, look, oh my God, this dude just did this. And I'm expecting her to give me the answer that I need to be asking him for. So now Shawn is in a position to say, well, do I give her some suggestions, or do I give her what she needs to do? And as a friend and as a therapist, because she has two different hats, it's her job to say, well, this is your fire, not mine. Go talk to that person, right? And that's her boundary onto me, which makes me be accountable for what I need from my partner or from my friend or from my children. So that's how like it looks for me in therapy.
I like that. I need that. I like that.
It's on Amazon.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of I love and you sent me to her training.
Oh, yes.
I
Miss
love
Nedra
yes.
Swab. Love her. I
Yes.
follow her on Instagram. She is
She's the bomb.
amazing. Yes.
Yes. And she has a workbook from her first book.
Yes, which I have
That
as well. Let me see, where is I have it here somewhere. Yeah.
it's her first book was Set Boundaries, Find Peace.
Hmm.
Oh, is
You
this it?
have that one available to show? Because I have
No,
mine,
this is
it's
the
all the way up.
workbook that she
Yeah,
has.
that's the workbook.
That's the workbook. And so
Hmm.
I do exercises. I have
Hmm.
patients get this book and I work with them
Hmm.
um, with just practical just exercising for understanding their own needs and
Hmm.
how to set boundaries. So I really like that book. For me, I do brain spotting. So I do a lot of somatic therapy um, treatment modality, which I find really, really helpful with, I don't have my little brain here, but you know, this is your brain, this is the outer
Yes.
layer of the brain. So we're getting into the subcortical area of the brain where our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response is,
Hmm.
and in the amygdala, and
Right.
doing a lot of deep processing with them. Um, when it comes to whatever that stress response is when they're trying to set boundaries. And so a lot of the themes I feel that comes up is maybe some never reported sexual abuse, physical
Hmm.
abuse, emotional abuse, domestic violence, uh,
Hmm.
seeing domestic violence, a lot of fear,
Hmm.
um, but helping people to be able to process somatically how their body feels, kind of bringing that mind-body connection,
Right.
that mindfulness piece
Hmm.
really helps people to kind of tap into their ability to like regulate their emotions, and they can handle it better when they need to set a boundary,
Hmm.
because you're just getting into an area of the brain that talking just can't. Not that talking
Right.
is not helpful, it
Hmm.
is. Talk therapy is helpful, but those EMDRs and those brain spotting and
Hmm.
those types of treatments they're just deeper into the,
Right.
so
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's not just top head where it's just like talk, 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 but it's learning how your body gets activated, those sensory sensations, those body sensations. So we're talking about like the nauseous feeling or the tummy aches or the palpitations or the pressure in your chest that makes you feel like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I have a heart attack now,
Mhm.
or the sweatiness. So that's what you're talking about, correct?
Yes, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people not even being able to recognize
Mm,
that a boundary probably needs to be set.
mm-hmm.
They feel this way,
Yeah.
but there's no like conscious understanding that maybe a family member is putting too much pressure on them, or there's a lot of expectation.
Mm-hmm.
There's like no aware, because they're so used to being in that environment and doing, they're
Right.
not understanding, why do I feel this way? Why,
Mhm.
why do I
Yeah.
feel this way when I'm with
Yeah.
this particular person? Or why do I have a difficult time? There's like not a lot of self-awareness.
Right. Right. Absolutely. What comes to mind is, the client that says, I'm always tired and I'm always drowsy and I just want to go to sleep. Really? You know, and it's the emotional overload that is felt physically, and they have no awareness of like how maybe some of those social interactions are
Mhm.
contributing to that like physical fatigue. Like you feel like you ran a marathon. And it's
Mhm.
Right,
real. It's
right.
real. Mm-hmm.
And when you get into that brain spotting and they're in that eye position and they're processing and they're like telling me all of a sudden stuff with the husband came up and the husband was in their face and yelling and screaming at them and their kids were around and it's like, oh, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is why I feel overwhelmed or I feel stressed. It's kind of like a lot of people kind of live in this disassociated state
Mm-hmm.
where they're not connected.
Yes. I think now in society, we all live at some point or another as we're moving through our day. I think it's happening more often on a daily basis that we are disassociating.
Yeah, because I saw this meme the other day as I was disassociating on social media. Um,
Ah,
Right?
and it's talking about ways in which we disassociate. And it was saying
Uh-huh.
watching television, getting on TikTok for hours,
wow.
or social media. It was saying it just gave a list of ways in which we just go about trying to forget, of course, substances, hanging out with friends, a lot of avoidance or procrastination
Mm-hmm.
is can be, a form of disassociating. Doesn't have to necessarily mean in the terms of just, I guess when you
Yeah.
disassociate, you hear like PTSD type,
Right. Like
On
out
TikTok,
of
it's
the
freaking up.
out
body,
of the body
feeling,
type
feeling.
hovering,
Mm-hmm.
right? It can
Mm-hmm. Or
literally,
dazed and confused, like kind of dozing off into space. Yeah, it doesn't always look like that. Uh-huh.
right. You were gonna
Yeah. Janisha, were you gonna say something?
I was saying, just like when we have all these notes that we need to do and we decide to be on TikTok. Ah,
Oh my
no,
goodness.
we'll just do it later.
Eh, so here's a topic because both of you, and myself included, I mean, we're all a lot of the work that we do is around boundary setting, and we understand how setting boundaries, when we don't set these healthy boundaries, it can really be the 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 reason why we're feeling the anxiety or those depressive symptoms, um, some of the time, maybe even most of the time. Um, but I want to get your take. Something that I always enjoy talking about is codependency
Mm.
Mm.
because it's such a layered topic. And just to put it into perspective too, because I think it was Sean who mentioned it, none of this exists without attachment. Attachment is really the basis of the theoretical perspective. And, it's attachment theory. It's the secure attachment, the insecure attachment, the avoidant attachment, the disorganized attachment. What does that mean? It's really the way that we relate to others. And it has a lot to do with how we how we grow up as kids, not just in the family dynamic, but then in any other areas of our social development as well. But really, the theory also is huge on the primary caregivers.
Mm.
Um, and codependency is a part of that. It's typically a part of the anxious the anxious attachment style. Um, but I am curious because it does have its uh, origins in the substance abuse, within the substance abuse and the family dynamics, but it's kind of extended over to, and grown, and it has a huge to the why it's I have a love and hate relationship with the term codependency. And I'll describe later when, but I want to hear from you both. That term. Hmm.
I think for me, because I have like, I want to say I'm able to detach a lot, but then when I do get attached, it's like, it's either I'm all in or I'm all out. Like it's like straddling the fence a little bit, but it also has to do with my trauma from growing up without, an active father. And so what I think about that is that codependency, because I feel like I had to do so much for so many to have them involved. I created this lifestyle of I'm always here for you when you need it. So I'm your Captain Save-A-Ho. Like I'm always here to help you. And that codependency, like, and you pass that on. Don't laugh. I'm just saying.
No, I'm laughing because my husband used to tell me that all the time. He said, "You love playing Captain Save-A-Ho." He tell me that all the time. That's a. I don't know if that's a Long Beach thing or what, but he used to tell me that all the time.
Yeah, and it's crazy because still to this day, I'm like, all right, am I doing too much or am I not doing enough? And it's like, it's very hard, especially as a clinician, and a human, to be like, okay, I need to set my boundaries for this. But then at the same time, it's like, am I hurting this person by doing so much for them? So it's more of the, okay, you need to detach because you are the problem, not this person. The other person is only going to attach to you because you continue to allow them to attach to you. So when do you decide that you're doing it 20 times too much? Because after 20 times, that they know that at least they get 20 times of your yeses. So yeah. I think that codependency can happen throughout the whole family system. Are you enabling those around you from being able to independently thrive? So like I tell my clients, at any point I can be gone. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if I'm always the one to support this whole system or to be here for you as a clinician, or if you can't find another therapist? What does that look like for you? So codependency runs on both ends and it affects both partners or both entities of that system.
Yeah. And even as it looks like Shawn is thinking still, so I'm going to chime in a bit. I think the other piece to this, even as I'm hearing you speak, is the survival mechanism or that comes also with codependency on what is what I'm also hearing from you too, that sometimes there can be moments where it can be seen as a healthy interaction or behavior to engage in, or relational interaction to engage in, because in these moments of crisis, we are leaning into our support systems, and we could be asking more of them than we typically would. And so looking at it from that stance, and that's really where I have the love-hate relationship with codependency. Because the other thing that I think about is I look at it as, okay, who created this term? I don't know who created this term. I don't know if the person was a white person. Okay. And how well does that how well does it fit into, as a Latina, generally speaking, the Latino family system, because we all are enmeshed. And if we think about like the generational trauma and oppression, and we're a collective. And if we think about it, most countries outside of the US are collectives. So how much of what we define as codependency is also cultural? And, and that's the constant conversation that I have with my clients as well. It's not to diminish, the real negative, unhealthy, maybe better said, unhealthy behaviors and relationships that we foster or that we allow. And yet at the same time, what are maybe some of the healthier or some of the more, how can some of those behaviors be appropriate at given times too? And setting a boundary, like you said, like it becomes an issue when you start to feel uneasy about it, whether it's in your own personal experience or when you're seeing how the person is responding to you. But other than that, if you're completely fine with whatever those, like, you know, being, you know, doing for others, and it comes from a place of like an altruistic
Mhm.
space, you know, and this is what you do, and this is what, you know, brings you life, is it really maladaptive then? I
Mhm.
don't know the answer to that. I think it's
Hmm. I never thought.
subjective.
I think it's also the component of, is this going to affect you after you do it? Not even emotionally,
Mhm.
but in the whole system. And for instance, like for my grandmother, I can call on her for everything. My brother too. But at what point does it become the maladaptive is when the
Mhm.
behaviors start showing negative outcomes, right? So if I'm
Yeah.
always giving you, if I call my granny and say, Granny, I need this, and I know she financially can't afford it, but I continually ask and she continually gives, that's when it becomes the negative because she
That,
doesn't
yes.
have the boundary
Yes.
to know anymore.
There's
And
like an
that's what I'm referring
abuse
to. I'm
of the
sorry.
codependency.
Say
there's
that
a
one more time, Shawn. I'm
there's
sorry.
like an no, I was thinking about what you're saying because I never thought about it in that term,
Mhm.
that there's like two sides of codependency, that
Yeah. I mean, I think the same thing with people pleasing too.
I think
You
it
know,
overlaps. Like people pleasing and codependency is
yeah, I think they're kind of the same thing. But
nice.
yeah, I think the same thing, I guess another, you know, in the uh workshop that Nedra did, the author of the book that Shawn just showed, you know, she offered a perspective on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love her even more, because people pleasing doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Like, we brush our teeth. We brush our teeth because, well, we have to, you know, if we want to have like healthy dentures, you know, and you know, but then if we're working with people and we're, you know, we want to give off, you know, good breath per se, um, in lots of ways we're people pleasing, but it's a healthy thing, you know, for us, and also to form relationships. We don't want people to avoid us, you know. That's, you know, we don't want to feel embarrassed in those situations, or to somebody to come up to us and say to us like, here's a mint, you know. um so it's looking at it, you know, it's two sides of the same coin.
Mm,
hmm,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I struggle with that, I guess, because I never now I'm always open to new perspectives. So I think that's
Hmm.
a great perspective. That's a great way to, I never thought about it in that way. But I guess the type of codependency that I usually encounter is the one that sends people into therapy because
Hmm.
it's severely impacting their emotional
So
well-being.
give us some examples of what that might look like.
Um, hmm.
I can give you one.
Sorry, I was just thinking. Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. You got it? You found it?
Well, I think so.
It's also layered.
Yes,
It's
It's a load of
layered.
potatoes.
because I'm
Yeah.
thinking of like in romantic relationships.
Mm,
Hmm. Oh, Jesus.
A
Yeah.
lot of romantic relationships where it's very emotionally abusive and exhausting, but there's still this wanting to be attached to this person that is
mhm.
very
Hmm.
emotionally, severely
Hmm.
emotionally abusive. Sometimes we're going into talking about people that are maybe borderline, or
Mhm.
or we're going into
Narcissistic.
You know, and yeah, and with that, I do want to agree with you, because it's oversimplistic to say, you know, that people have to, you know, so long as people are okay with it, because there are people in abusive relationships that think this is okay, and they are okay with that. They justify that. Um, and so, yeah, and that's why it is layered. It isn't something that, it can just be like
Yeah,
fit into a box or
yeah.
whatever. But I thank you for that, like clarification, as to like how it could be seen
Or
as.
parents kind of
Hmm.
using their children as extensions of themselves,
Right. Oh
or
yeah, absolutely.
their
Hmm.
children emotionally as
Mhm.
a therapist, or to parentify them, or to get some sort of financial need
Hmm.
met. There's
Gain,
exploitation,
really. Uh-huh.
um, gain, um, and then getting upset when,
Hmm.
and then the feelings of rejection and things like that. And then I've seen very high achieving women, that everybody comes to, so they're constantly lending money. Um, there's no accountability. That person feeling like they have to help that person. Even though financially it's taking a toll on their savings, it's taking a toll on
Hmm.
their livelihood. Um, just the constant rescuing.
Hmm.
I even see, and I'm gonna say it, religious codependency
Hmm.
and trauma, especially
Yeah.
with people, the Black church.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of financial codependency, and feeling that you have to do this or you have to do that,
Hmm.
or your soul is going to be eternally in damnation. So a
Hmm.
lot of religious trauma.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it goes on and on.
Yeah.
That's mostly um, what I've seen.
Right. Right.
And then in my own life,
Hmm.
just very enmeshed
Hmm.
parents, and I'm not enmeshed,
Right.
so I'm like,
You're differentiated.
yeah, and then them trying to be enmeshed,
Hmm.
because I've worked very hard not to be enmeshed, and I don't know what my attachment style is, it's probably anxious, insecure, I'm sure, about
Mhm.
Oh my
different things.
gosh, there's a really good book for that. It's in the office, but it's called Attached by Amir Levin. Um, that's a really great book. It's the one that I use with my clients. And then I, if you do decide to get it, I encourage you to read it before um, offering it to clients because I break it up in parts. So I have them read like maybe the first three chapters because it's the first three chapters. It's like understanding what attachment is, but then what is attachment in like relationships, and then the third chapter kind of delves into like this self-assessment to kind of help to them identify under which attachment they fall under, and then all the other chapters kind of go into those, so it's kind of like jumping around. It's a kind of book that you kind of jump around on, but and I enjoy that book, and my clients do too, so that's.
And I don't know if this is in Western culture. I mean, like
Uh-huh.
European, I don't know, but what I'm finding recently, I feel like there's this theme of like, because someone is a chronological age, and I
Mhm.
think Nidra talked about this, there's an automatic, I feel like it's more in minority communities, just an automatic respecting your elders. There's religious references to respecting, honoring your mother and thy father, and
Yeah.
these things, which I do, for me as a Christian, I do believe in a lot of these things, but I also believe that God wants us to have boundaries, and that's just what I'm going to say about that.
Mhm.
Because even God has boundaries.
Yes.
He developed the world on the seventh day, and then he rested. He took a
Mhm.
break. So, um, there's this thing that just because someone is older, that they're allowed to kind of tell you, there's that expectation that you are allowed to do anything.
Go with the flow. Just go with
Yeah,
it.
but I've had to tell, chronological age does not
Does not
equal
equal respect.
emotional maturity or respect.
Right.
And people are going to be like, oh, it doesn't, they're like, what? So
And
because
that is
Well,
so
no.
funny because that recently happened in a situation, and it was between two adults. One was older, one was younger. And when I spoke to the older one, it was like, oh, that person was disrespectful. Not knowing, I heard the whole conversation. I was like, no, they just address the issue and set their boundaries. And what
right,
was disrespectful with me putting my boundary out to let you know, hey, when this happens, you don't get to do this. Like, as an adult, we are both adults. So what makes you think you can yell at me? You can talk to me calmly. You don't have to raise your voice. Does that make you feel better? Because the real ideal is you're raising your voice made me disconnect even more. Now I'm not even listening to you. I just feel the yelling.
Right.
And just because you're older doesn't give you privilege to disrespect me, because we're still that way. That happens with parents and children all the time.
All the time. And that's a huge one. Even as, you got your own job, you got, you take care of them. And it's like, you can't tell them no because they're your parents. You got the game twisted. So I've done a lot of work in that area. But
no, and I think, go ahead. I'm sorry. No, I think the other thing too is you mentioned something. It's what parents do with their children. And I think that's something else that we also we can't ignore either, that, okay, yes, they're little people. And it's so easy because we're so much bigger and we can overpower them. But I love it when my niece tells me, Tia, enough. That's it. Stop. Oh, okay, sure. And it could be anything. It could be me singing. It could be me, whatever it is. She's like, yeah, stop. Okay. So, it's teaching our kids to giving them permission to set their own boundaries and not taking it personally as like, they just disrespected me.
Right,
No,
or
they didn't.
invalidating their
If it
feelings all the time.
right.
Constant invalid. This is how we build insecure adults. They have a right to feel how they want to feel. They have a right, and even if it's a wrong way of handling something, explain. Don't tell kids. I just don't believe in telling people, and out of experience, just because I said so.
Right.
Explain why it's wrong.
Absolutely.
And that's with the parenting styles too, right? So imagine one parent on this spectrum and then another one on this spectrum. So in my household, my grandmother raised us to kind of communicate effectively and be able to say how we feel, as opposed to my husband didn't have the same upbringing per se. So we have a 18-year-old who's going to graduate this year and going to college. And she recently went through advocating for herself in school, and this teacher was not of color. So my daughter overheard her or learned that the lady said something about her to another student. So my daughter went to the lady and said, hey, can I talk to you outside about something? She said, no, you can say it here. So you gave her permission to talk. So when she addressed the issue, then it became, oh, I feel threatened, or, no, she's advocating to let you know that you crossed a boundary. If you have something to say to me, say it to me. Now, your feelings are your feelings. They're valid. We can't take that away from you. But the fact is, this is a young adult that we're teaching to advocate for herself. And for you to feel intimidated, we need to explore why. And so teaching the facts versus feelings is an extreme component of boundary setting. Let's process your feelings, but let's go back to the fact that you don't have a right, or you should not be doing these things, because first of all, you're adult, you're supposed to lead by example, and this is how the protocols or the standard of procedure should go as a teacher or as a mom or a dad. So I can say you're not allowed to cuss because it's just something that's not very pleasant. It doesn't sound nice. It's not a pleasing. But your feeling is valid. You can feel that way.
Yeah.
Because it's yours.
Yeah.
But you're not going to act like that.
Right. Right. It's so,
That's huge.
yeah, being able to provide explanation, giving space for the child to be heard, and in working together, I mean, I think these are the cornerstones, right? Or the ingredients that are definitely needed in order to begin to set the healthy boundaries. And that's what we're talking about, right? The negotiations, the compromise, the being able to just sit back and listen and reflect. And it's all related to attachment. I think we just kind of did the whole thing. And so with that being said, okay, because I want to give you both your Saturday. It's the weekend. Um, I am so happy that you both were able to, join me today. Take the time out of your busy days to sit and have a conversation about this. I hope you guys had fun with this and that we can get together and maybe do a part two. Uh,
Love that. This was
uh,
great.
Yeah, and so just for our listeners to learn more about you both, can you how can they find you? Where are you? How can they find you?
So, you can definitely look me up. I have an Instagram, Shawn, SHAWN _JP LCSW. That's my kind of like more my I don't know if I should use my branding page. But then I also have Energy Wellness, which is my business page, that you can also follow, ENERJE and then wellness. It's all one word. It's energy spelled a little different because my middle name backwards. But and you can follow me on there. You can also, I also have Energy Wellness has a Facebook page that you can also follow. And then www.energywellness, ENERJE wellness.com. That's my website. You can email me like an inquiry. It comes directly to me. And I'm trying to think where else you can contact me. Those are pretty much like my main ways of contacting me. Instagram. I really like my Instagram, Shawn _JP LCSW. I'm on there most of the time, so you could definitely contact me on that site.
Okay. And for you, Janisha?
So you guys can follow me at _happy therapist. And also on Facebook, I have the StudyRite group where those of you who are looking to get licensed the first time, go to StudyRite, STUDYRITE, the right way, not right, but the right way, because we're going to pass the right way. And you can also find inquiries about our clinicians and more about StudyRite at www.thehappytherapist.org.
Thank you both. And then, if all the information is also going to be on our show notes. So, if you missed it, don't worry, it's all in the show notes, and you'll be able to find these amazing, beautiful women on there. And then we're going to see if we can have a part two to this, as well. But then again, thank you so much to both of you. And thank you for tuning in and listening in. I hope that you were able to receive lots and lots of nuggets on this episode, and wishing you off, as always, con mucha, mucha, mucha buena vibra. You have just listened to an episode with Dr. Ortiz in Buena Vibra. I hope you enjoyed this episode and subscribe. Join me next week, and until then, sending you off with Buena Vibra.